I'm Paul Edwards. I'm an independently published author, and first and foremost, a monster kid. Today I'm reading Famous Monsters of Filmland, issue number 84 from 1971. I thought some of you might enjoy looking through this great old monster magazine with me. Just in case you don't own your own copy of Famous Monsters of Filmland, issue number 84 from 1971. And together we can see what kinds of vintage monster goodness is in here. For once, we don't have a painted cover. Instead, we have a photo cover of Christopher Lee in character as Dracula. You probably know Christopher Lee did a whole bunch of Dracula films for Hammer Studios. And whenever Dracula was in kill mode, they would make Christopher Lee wear these bloodshot contact lenses, which really bothered the heck out of his eyes, but it was worth it because the effect is great. All right, cover price, 60 cents. Let's see what we've got inside. Well, starting off good, with a picture of Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster. Oh, we're going to get the monster that challenged the world in this one. And the Hunchback. The Hunchbacks, plural. House of Dracula. The Devil Commands is a lesser-known Karloff movie. That's going to be worth seeing. All right. All right, got some good things in store for us here. Let's get started. Of course, as always, monster kids were writing in to the Fang Mail, asking for pictures of their favorite monsters or talking about their favorite movies. Some of them got their pictures published. Nice. The monster that challenged the world. Nice. The monster that challenged the world was a huge mollusk. Actually, a whole bunch of huge mollusks. You know, wouldn't you think the kids reading this would be like, this is what we want, pictures of the monsters, not pictures of some guy screaming because he's seeing the monster. Here, this is much better. Monster wrecking the lab. This is near the end of the film. Here's the big finish in a photo spread. Tim Holt shoots a jolt of live steam that makes the sea beast scream. Well, he does. That's exactly right. That's a great spread. I like that. This is the author of the screenplay being attacked by her own creation. I hope that never happens to me. I've made up some pretty creepy monsters in my books. I hope they're not coming to get me. The Scream Test. These are quiz questions on pictures. For example, number 1. Is this picture from Invasion of the Animal People, Snow Creature, or Half Human? Nice. Check out this guy. Oh, and then if you're stumped by any of these, the answers are printed here upside down. Okay. The Hunchbacks of Notre Dame. The different versions there have been of the Hunchback. My favorite always will be Lon Chaney Sr. in the silent version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. If you've never seen it, you can check that film out on my Silent Horror Films podcast. I've got that one up. But there were more than just the Lon Chaney version. Oh, Send for a Monster. Wait a minute. We should definitely do that. Do they come shipped? Like the Frankenstein monster did? Did Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein? Oh. Okay. This is a mildly controversial stand that I have on the Universal films. I think both House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, the posters were better than the whole movie. They really do. The posters promise you a lot. In both cases, the posters promised you 5 quote-unquote monsters. Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula, the Mad Scientist, and the Hunchback. And in both cases, House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, the monsters or monster-ish characters didn't interact with each other. They were just, living their own best lives, being monsters in separate but related stories. I was never overly a fan of them. And given a choice between the two, I would say House of Dracula is a better film, but mostly because of not any of the main attractions, but because of Onslow Stevens' performance as the doctor, who's Dr. Edelman, who's slowly being transformed into a vampire. This is a publicity still. This exact scene didn't happen in the movie, but it's a pretty good one, though. So in House of Dracula, this scientist, played by Onslow Stevens, thinks that he can cure all of the monsters. He starts out by trying to cure Dracula of his vampirism, and then along the way, he agrees to try to find a cure for Lawrence Talbot's werewolfism. And during the course of his adventures, he comes upon the dormant body of the Frankenstein monster. So he's got a house full of monsters. But when they say House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, I think in both cases it's not a physical house. It's a house as in the family, the lineage. Because in House of Frankenstein, it was, although the Frankensteins were all dead, the lineage of their work was going on through Dr. Neiman. And in this picture, House of Dracula, although Dracula is dealt with only partway through the film, his legacy lives on because he's contaminated the blood of Dr. Edelman, Onslow Stevens' character. So my thoughts when I hear House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula is that's what they mean, not a physical house. This is also just a publicity picture, not an actual scene from the film. But the Wolfman always looks good, though. At one point, Lawrence Talbot was trying to commit suicide because he couldn't stand to be a werewolf. So he jumped off a cliff, but he washed up into these caves. And when Dr. Edelman went down to rescue him, he was in werewolf form. So that was bad timing. Now, what if Dr. Edelman had been infected both by Dracula's blood and by a bite from the Wolfman? Would he turn into both? Would he turn into some sort of vamped out werewolf? Also, I gotta say, the Hunchback, quote unquote, casting in this particular movie was just mean. This is the quote unquote hunchback, this nice nurse who just happens to have a deformity. And there's nothing monstrous about her. They have her there so that they can put hunchback, quote unquote, on the posters. That's what that is. There's Dr. Edelman once he's been vamped out and he's fantasizing about running amok with the Frankenstein monster at his side. That is a great shot of Glenn Strange as the Frankenstein monster. Oh, look at that. If you were a kid reading this magazine in 1971, you would be sorely tempted to just scissor this out and tape it up to the door of your bedroom or to your notebook cover. That is great. The play of shadow on that is so good. These both are publicity images, not actual frames of the film. The sleeping monster slowly wakes from its nightmares. Now that makes you wonder, what does the Frankenstein monster have nightmares about? Fire? Three rare poses from Frankenstrange. In other words, the Glenn Strange version of the Frankenstein monster. I've seen images from this same photo shoot before where they have the shadow going up. Those are great. You know, I fully realize Boris Karloff is the Frankenstein monster. But I have to say, Glenn Strange played the Frankenstein monster in the same number of movies Karloff did, 3. And because he was more recent, the Glenn Strange version of the Frankenstein monster is the version that artists used on products like toys and puzzles and games and things like that when they were portraying the Frankenstein monster, especially in the 60s, but also into the 70s. So that's why the Glenn Strange version of the Frankenstein monster looks so familiar, because it's been copied so much. Nice. Boy, a little creepy lighting goes a long way, doesn't it? Now, does the Frankenstein monster remember Lawrence Talbot, who he had met before in Frankenstein Meets the Wolf Man? I don't know. Imagine being a kid back in the day when they were actually making these films and being able to go on set and appear in a photo with one of the monsters. That's a funny one. I like that. Wow. Yep, I just cannot get enough Glenn Strange Frankenstein monster. Lon Chaney Jr. helping Glenn Strange into his costume. I think it took more than that. I think it took quite a lot of work. This is funny. This is really funny. Edelman, once he's contaminated with Dracula's blood, he has a fantasy about his good side and his evil side arguing to take control of him. So that's what this composite picture is. Yeah. Okay, The Devil Commands is a film that depicts Boris Karloff as a scientist whose wife is killed in an accident, and Karloff wants to try to communicate through scientific means, communicate with her disembodied brainwaves and essentially speak to her from beyond the grave, but in a scientific way, not an occult way. As you can imagine, things don't end well for anybody. My favorite scene in this film, if you're familiar with it, and don't feel bad if you're not, because it's a lesser known Karloff film, but if you have seen it, my favorite scene is near the end when all the corpses at the table start to move and get up all at the same time. It's so creepy. So creepy. Monster World, the sister magazine to famous monsters of filmland. You asked for it, where kids wrote in and requested pictures of their favorite monsters. See, if they had a magazine like this nowadays, they wouldn't need a feature like this, because you could just Google, if you want a picture of the Mummy, you can just Google the Mummy and get a ton of them. 1971, that was not an option. You had to wait for some magazine to print them. And when you got one, you would hang on to it for dear life. Ooh. The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm. I will admit it, I have not seen this film. There, I said it. Even I can't see everything. Have you? Do you remember this scene? Of course, this is Son of Frankenstein, where they hit the horror jackpot. Bela Lugosi as Igor, Basil Rathbone as Dr. Wolfgang Frankenstein, and Boris Karloff for the final time as the Frankenstein monster. Horror jackpot, and then right down to the bottom with Plan 9 from Outer Space. Oh boy. Ooh. This is a continuation from the last issue. They were summarizing the movie version of The Raven, which co-starred Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff. This time around, Lugosi was the main villain. Girls and Ghouls Gallery. Monsters of the Month. A Brave Girl. These kids must have been so happy to get their picture printed in Famous Monsters. Whatever happened to my Transylvanian twist? It's now the MASH. Okay, really? Can be heard 5 miles? Really? Really? Is that really something you would want? I guess if you were like 8 years old, yeah. Yeah, I can do without the live ants, thanks. Yeah, there were very few horror comics in the 60s. There had been a ton in the 50s, and then there was a big outcry. There were almost none in the 60s. But now, in the early 70s, they were starting to make a return. And in fact, the first half of the 70s was big for horror comics. Up until Star Wars took everything over. Then everything became a ripoff of Star Wars. All right, should we send away and get our own 8mm monster movies, even though it's only part of a movie, like 8 to 10 minutes worth of the movie? I've mentioned this before, but for years, I could not figure out for the life of me what this picture was, because it wasn't from any monster movie that I recognized. I finally learned the answer. If you've seen this picture and been driven nuts by this question, here's the answer. This is the actor who played Renfield on stage, not in the movies, on stage, in the stage version of the Bela Lugosi Dracula, the play that he was in for years before the movie. That's what that is. That's Renfield from Renfield from Broadway, not from an actual movie. And of course, you can send away to get your vinyl albums. Oh, they finally came up with some new, not newly created movies, but new sales to make. These were not in the previous ads for 8mm home movies. Son of Kong, My Son the Vampire, The Mysterious Dr. Satan. That is a serial, Serial, that kind of serial, a movie serial. Yep. Mighty Joe Young is sometimes forgotten. It was made by the same guys who made King Kong. It was a sort of a follow-up. Oh, wow. Look at that. Look at that mask. Hand-painted. Direct from Hollywood. Wow. Oh, and if you like the idea of the 8mm films, but you don't have a projector, don't worry. They got you covered on that, too. You can send away and get a projector. Well, we got some of the greats here. Now, wait a minute. One of these things is wrong. See if you can figure it out. Bela Lugosi, okay. Vincent Price, yep, okay. Now, look here. Do you see a problem? Look closely. Look at the captions. They've switched them. This is Christopher Lee. And this says Peter Cushing. See, Christopher Lee's picture belongs here. Christopher Lee. This is Peter Cushing's spot, but Peter Cushing's picture is here. It should be here. See, they switched Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Or maybe this is where they meant to put the pictures and it's the names that got switched. Maybe that's it. But either way, it's not so good. I'll bet you, if you look at the letters to the magazine in the next issue, somebody called them out on it. At least I hope they did. Prince Valiant. Were you ever a Prince Valiant fan? I never got into that. I was never so much for the fantasy. I like the science fiction and horror more. Ooh, this is worth taking a closer look at. I remember this ad clear as a bell. So this was a set of monster models that you could all use together. So you get a mad doctor to start with. We need a girl victim for the experiment. No problem, doctor, says Vampirella. The Frankenstein monster says, no problem, heh. Out in the city streets, the doctor says, keep her quiet, as the girl's screaming, help, help. And Vampirella says, don't worry, this is New York, no one will help her. Back in Dr. Deadly's dungeon, experiment starts. If this experiment works, she'll turn into a fly. That sounds so horrible, it even scares a Vampirella like me. Will the experiment succeed? It's up to you. When you build your Monster Scenes custom builder kits from Aurora. And Aurora models were nothing to sneeze at. They were pretty good. I had most of their dinosaur series. I never had these though. You can get the hanging cage, you can get the pendulum, the lab table, the remains of other experiments. Eesh. Pretty creepy. Wow. Listen, if you enjoy classic monsters and vintage horror, you'll love my books, the Mourner's Woods books. It's my series of novels that are all set in a haunted forest in the American Northwest. Each book has different monsters and a completely different cast of characters, so there's always something new to be afraid of, and you never know for sure who's going to live or die. My books are available on Amazon.com. That's the Mourner's Woods books. My name again is Paul Edwards. Thanks for spending some time looking through this great old monster magazine with me. I will see you in Mourner's Woods.